menarche, M-E-N-A-R-C-H-E, menarche. Okay, there is a term called menarche. Do you know what menarche means? Menarche is the first menstrual cycle. Okay, menarche is the starting of the menstrual cycle. It is the first menstrual cycle, and it usually occurs at around the age of 13 years of age. In females, it is around 13 years of age, and approximately 13 years of age. Then in there are various terms used, like menorrhagia is a term used. What do you understand by menorrhagia? Menorrhagia means when the menstruation, when the flow of, when the menstruation much, then it is known as menorrhagia. That means the bleeding is too much. Okay. Then there is a term called dysmenorrhea. As you might have guessed, dysmenorrhea means there is painful menstruation. There is painful, there is spasmodic pain, and because of the spasmodic pain, one is not able to perform normal daily activities. So it is known as dysmenorrhea. Then there is a term called amenorrhea. Amenorrhea means absence of menstruation. Okay, like in case of pregnancy, when a female is pregnant, there is no menstruation. Okay, so amenorrhea means cessation, there is no menstruation. Absence of menstruation is known as amenorrhea. Usually in pregnancy, there is physiological amenorrhea for 9 months. Then there is a term called gestation. Gestation means the time period during which the fetal development occurs in mother. There is fetal development going on. Okay. And when we are discussing menstrual cycle, we need to understand the changes in ovary, the changes that are going on in the uterus, the changes that are going on in cervix. Okay, so basically menstrual cycle, when we discuss, we will be talking simultaneously about the ovarian cycle and the uterine cycle, and at the same time we will be talking about the hormonal levels. So I hope you know that the first phase of menstruation is known as proliferative phase. Okay, proliferative phase, and the second phase is known as secretory phase or luteal phase. Okay, secretory phase or luteal phase. So in the proliferative phase, there is dominance of FSH, that is follicle stimulating hormone. The hormone estrogen is also dominant. Estrogen hormone is high. The level of estrogen hormone is high. Okay. Then in the second phase, there is increase in the level of progesterone, okay, which is known as secretory phase, and the level of progesterone is high. Okay. So before going into detail, I hope it's better to talk to you about the actions of hormones, the functions of each and every hormones. Okay. So let's first talk about the actions of estrogen, that is the functions of estrogen. Okay. So estrogen has got both positive and negative feedback effects on FSH and LH secretion. Okay, the first point is estrogen has got both the positive and negative feedback effects on FSH and LH secretion. Okay. Then it causes maturation and yes, go ahead. Yes. Anybody, anything? Okay, the second action of estrogen is maturation and maintenance of the fallopian tubes. Maturation and maintenance of the fallopian tube. Okay. Then the third function is it causes the development of female secondary sex characteristics at puberty. It causes the development of female secondary sex characteristics at puberty. Okay, another function of estrogen is development of breast. Okay, development of breast, and the fifth function is it upregulates estrogen, LH. It upregulates estrogen, LH, and progesterone receptors. Okay, it upregulates the receptors. If the receptors are not upregulated, then the hormones will not be able to act. So the receptors should be there present, isn't it? So there is upregulation of the action of estrogen is it upregulates the estrogen receptor, the LH receptor, and the progesterone receptor. Okay, and another function is it causes proliferation and development of ovarian granulosa cells. Okay, estrogen maintains pregnancy. It lowers the uterine threshold to control. It lowers the uterine threshold to contractile stimuli during pregnancy. Because if there is uterine contraction during pregnancy, that will not lead to continuation of pregnancy, isn't it? So it's very important that the uterine contractions should not be there at the time of pregnancy, isn't it? So estrogen helps to lower the uterine threshold to contractile stimuli during pregnancy, and estrogen stimulates prolactin secretion, but then blocks its action on the breast. Okay, so you have to remember the functions of estrogen. Then coming to functions of progesterone. Progesterone has got same way as that of estrogen. Progesterone has got negative feedback effects on FSH and LH secretion during luteal phase. First is the proliferative phase and the second is the luteal phase or secretory phase. The proliferative phase is also known as follicular phase, as the follicles are developed there. And then here we are talking about the actions of progesterone. Okay, so the first action of first we should know that progesterone has negative feedback effects on FSH and LH secretion during luteal phase. Okay, there is negative feedback effect on the FSH and LH secretion during luteal phase. Then progesterone maintains secretory activity of the uterus during the luteal phase. Okay, progesterone, it maintains the secretory activity of the uterus during luteal phase, and it maintains progesterone maintains pregnancy. Okay, progesterone maintains pregnancy, and progesterone raises the threshold, uterine threshold, to contractile stimuli during pregnancy, and it participates in the development of breasts. Okay, so progesterone participates in the development of breasts. Okay, with this brief review of the functions of estrogen and progesterone, let us study about menstrual cycle. Okay, so menstrual cycle, what is menstrual cycle? Are you able to hear me, class? Yes.
Yes,
Is the connection problem? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Menstrual cycle is the periodic vaginal bleeding that occurs with the shedding of the uterine mucosa. Okay, this is known as menstruation. So menstruation is the periodic vaginal bleeding that occurs with the shedding of the uterine mucosa. And we need to know about the cycle length. The length of the cycle is variable in women, but an average figure is 28 days from the start of one menstrual period to the start of the next. Okay, so the menstrual cycle is, we'll discuss it under 3 cycles. Okay, ovarian cycle, uterine cycle, and hormonal cycle. Why are we dividing it into ovarian and uterine and hormonal cycle is, during this cycle, various changes occur in ovaries, various changes occur in uterus, and there is fluctuation in the level of the hormones. Okay, so we have to understand all these 3 changes at once. So we'll take one at a time. So first let us start with ovarian cycle. Okay, ovarian cycle, what we need to know that the changes that are occurring in the ovaries, the ovarian cycle, here what we need to know that from the time of birth there are many primordial follicles under the ovarian capsule. Okay, from the time of birth itself there are many primordial follicles. Many primordial follicles are present there under the ovarian capsule, and each contains an immature ovum. Each primordial follicle contains an immature ovum. So at the start of each cycle, several of these follicles enlarge. Okay, so at the start of each cycle, what happens is several of these follicles will enlarge and a cavity forms around the ovum, which is called antrum formation. So this is occurring in the ovaries. Okay, this is occurring in the ovary. This is regarding the ovarian cycle. So what is happening? Main thing is, at the start of each cycle, several of the primordial follicles enlarge, and in the primordial follicle, in each of the primordial follicles, a cavity forms around the ovum, and that cavity is known as antrum. This cavity is filled with follicular fluid. Okay, this cavity is filled with the follicular fluid in it, and in humans, usually one of the follicles in one ovary starts to grow rapidly on about the 6th day and becomes the dominant follicles. In the beginning of the menstrual cycle, many primordial follicles start to grow, increase in size. But around 6th day, one of these primordial follicles, they start to grow more rapidly, and that particular follicle becomes dominant follicle, while other primordial follicles, they regress, and those which regress are known as atretic follicles. Okay, atretic follicles, and the atretic process involves apoptosis. Then what happens is, the secondary, all these changes are occurring in ovary, so it is a ovarian cycle. Okay, then we should also know that the primary source of circulating estrogen in the granulosa cells of ovary. We should know that the primary source of circulating estrogen is the granulosa cells of the ovaries. Okay. What we'll do is, we'll study about, as we were discussing about the ovarian cycle, isn't it? And we were talking that in the beginning, many follicles, many primordial follicles begin to develop, and one of them grows. In one of the primordial follicles, the growth is more, and other primordial follicles, their growth regresses and they become atretic. The one which grows bigger is known as dominant follicle, isn't it? And this dominant follicle later on becomes secondary. This dominant follicle goes on. This dominant follicle grows and it gives rise to Graafian follicle later on. Okay. And the atretic follicles, they undergo apoptosis. So during this phase, the hormone that is working predominantly is the estrogen hormone. Okay, it is mainly the estrogen hormone that is working. Then what happens is at about 14th day of the cycle, this follicle is distended. Okay, this follicle is so distended that it ruptures. Okay, it is so distended that it ruptures and the ovum is extruded into the abdominal cavity, and this process is known as ovulation. So in exam, what happens is, in your exam, we often ask you what is ovulation. In spotting exams, that is in practical exams, we ask define ovulation, or it may even come in your theory exams. Okay, what is ovulation? Define ovulation. Okay, so what happens is on the 14th day of the cycle, of the menstrual cycle, the distended ovum, that is the distended ovum, it ruptures and the ovum is extruded into the abdominal cavity. This process is known as ovulation. So what happens is, the ovum is then picked up by the fimbriated ends of the uterine tubes. Okay, the uterine tubes are also known as oviducts or fallopian tubes. Uterine tubes are also known as oviducts or fallopian tubes. Okay, and then this ovum is picked up by the fimbriated ends of the uterine tubes. And once it is picked up by the fimbriated ends of the uterine tubes, it is transported to the uterus. Okay, it is transported to the uterus. Unless fertilization occurs, if there is fertilization usually occurs in the ampulla of the fallopian tube, and there will be implantation in the uterus. If there is no fertilization, then the ovum will reach the uterus and it will be degenerated in the luteal phase. Okay. Then in exam, we often ask you the ovulation date of the ovulation. What happens is, you will be given the cycle length. You will be told that an individual has a cycle length of, let's say, 35 days, and now calculate the day of ovulation. Then how will you calculate the day of ovulation? You have to write the cycle length and you have to minus 14 days. Okay, that gives the ovulation day. Why do we minus 14 days? Because this 14 days is the second phase of the menstrual cycle, which is mainly constant. We have please remember that the menstrual cycle we have divided it into two phases: proliferative phase and secretory phase. Proliferative phase, estrogen is prominent. Secretory phase, progesterone is prominent. This secretory phase is very constant. I mean, secretory phase is constant, but proliferative phase is not constant. So what we do is we know that the proliferative phase is constant, that is 14. So the total ovulation day we take and we subtract 14. The cycle length minus 14 will give you the ovulation day. Okay. Cycle length minus 14 will give you the ovulation day. So ovulation day is calculated by taking the cycle length minus 14. For example, in our example, the cycle length was 35. So 35 minus 14, we will do 35 minus 14. So the ovulation day will come as, what's the answer? 21, isn't it? So that is how we calculate the ovulation day. And I think I'm not presenting the slide. Oh, I forgot. So how do we screen share? Let me try to share the slide, okay? Is the slide being presented? I know. PDF present भएको छैन हो?
छैन म्याम।
त्यसलाई तपाईहरुले अघिदेखि मेरो भोइस मात्र सुन्नु हो?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, so sorry. Present गर्दैछु. I'm trying to present. Is it coming or not? You please tell me, la. Actually, I'm not used to working in Teams. No, this is so present. Oh,
छैन।
okay, म ट्राई गर्छु ल। Google Meet मा आउँथ्यो मलाई है। Stop sharing भन्छ। Let's share भएको थियो आउँछ नआउँदैन। PowerPoint PowerPoint नु छैन मैले PDF गरेको डेस्कटप लिन्छु। Let me try ल। आयो भने भन्नु है, आएन भने अब सिक्नु पर्छ तपाईहरुसँग। That's all like किन क्रस आउँछ? Stop sharing, open share tree, browse whiteboard in freehand, no files available. PowerPoint नै गर्नुपर्ने। Your entire screen application window को you share. Share भयो screen?
छैन
भयो? छैन। ल मैले कसरी शेयर गर्ने? म त जाने म जस्तो टिम इज शेयरिङ भनेर आउँछ मेरोमा। डेस्कटप स्क्रिन त्यो भएको छैन।